Hi, I'm Dave Atkinson, and welcome to Life on the Straight. Please take a moment to listen to the song My Caregiver. It is now available on music stores and streaming services including iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, Pandora, and many others. I've also placed the music video under my Creative Projects playlist. This is part 8 of the story behind the song.
Well, chemo leaves a strange sensation.
We returned to Seattle on December 12th after giving my newly installed power port about a week to heal up. After a blood draw, what else, we met with Dr. Wagner. He had received the results of my echo test and was not pleased. His words were something along the lines of, "We don't want to begin treatment of cancer only to have you die of heart failure." Dr. Wagner was going to call an audible. The starting quarterback of chemo drugs would have to take the bench, and the less potent backup quarterback drug would take its place. He told us not to worry, it would do the trick. Chemotherapy treatments are performed in cycles, and they are not all the same depending on which drug a patient is under. For me, I would have 6 cycles of treatment. A cycle would consist of a single infusion in week 1, a second infusion using a different mix of chemicals in week 2, and no infusion in week 3. I would receive an injection into my thigh of Neulasta, a medicine that promoted the growth of white blood cells. That week off allowed my body to get its blood counts back into a more normal range. The thing is that the further you get in the treatment cycles, the harder it is to get back to normal. Day by day, your body gets weaker and weaker. The first chemo infusion went without drama, but 4 days after my second infusion, Amy had to take me to the ER in Port Angeles. My smartwatch had alerted me that my heart was in an AFib situation, and I had a rash all over my body that made me look like a lobster. The staff in the ER was able to get my heart under control, but I had to endure the extremely itchy rash until the beginning of my next chemo cycle on January 3rd. Dr. Wagner told us that we had to stay with the chemo formula, but that he would introduce a steroid into the cocktail of the second infusion, and that pretty much did the trick. We spent the night at the SCCA house after the chemo infusion, as we had an appointment with a heart doctor at the UW Medical Center the next day. Remember, the doctors were still relying on the results of the heart echo test improperly performed in SQUIM. My last CT scan was on November 28th. That is when we found out that the sarcoma cancer had spread to my lungs, and by the way, that made it stage 4 sarcoma. On January 18th, we returned to Seattle for another CT scan. There were no new tumors, and the ones that were in my lungs hadn't grown in size, so good news for a change. This is my week off that completed the second cycle. 2 down, 4 to go. The following week we checked into the SCCA house for 3 nights. Our first appointment was on the 23rd for a blood draw and a chemo infusion. Then we would travel to the UW Medical Center the following day for a stress test of my heart. They would inject a radioactive substance into an IV line, which would stress my heart. I would be fed into another CT scanner donut, but this one was specific to the heart. The following day, I would get a second heart echo test. This time, the nurse insisted that I prop myself up on my left side. She pointed out how important that posture is, as different internal organs slide out of the way inside of my body cavity, allowing for a more accurate ultrasound picture of my heart. As it turns out, my heart wasn't weak at all. I could have survived the starting quarterback chemo drug after all, and Dr. Wagner still chose to stick with my current drug. However, my heart was experiencing premature ventricular contractions, or PVCs. It is an extra heartbeat in one of the ventricles and is often benign. For me, the occurrence was enough for the doctor to describe a drug called carvedilol, which lessens their severity. This is a drug that I will remain on for the rest of my life. Meanwhile, we had a huge decision to make regarding the remodel of our house. We needed to take a leap of faith that the chemo and radiation would work out fine. Getting partway through a remodel only to have me die wasn't something that I wanted Amy to have to deal with. Still, our builder of choice needed a commitment from us, otherwise they would most likely be taking on another job, which could push us out another year. So on February 20th, we gave them the go-ahead to put our project into their upcoming schedule once they finished the house they were on. Our original architectural sketches would no longer work for my situation, as we were no longer thinking of finishing the basement. Our new design would be for a single-level living with a lift to get my wheelchair up a half story from the garage floor and back down again. Entering into all of this drama was a session with two gentlemen in Squim to begin the construction of my prosthetic leg. I had to stand while they created a plaster cast of my surgical site. When completed, half of my lower body would sit in this socket, which would be held in place by straps that tightened above my pelvic bone. The prosthetic leg attached to the socket. To walk, I would swing my body to create momentum that would force the leg forward. The leg would lock into place, allowing me to put my weight on it, and then I could swing my right leg forward. In any case, given my state of chemo fatigue, it was all I could do to stay upright while the plaster mold was being made. On February 24th, my prosthetic leg was somewhat ready to test. 4 days earlier, I had my 8th chemo infusion, and to say that I lacked energy is an understatement. They didn't have the final leg yet, but had built one with inferior parts just so I could test out how well the socket fit my body and if I could walk using the parallel bars for support. I did pretty good considering. I wouldn't pick up my completed leg until May. After my 9th chemo infusion on March 6th, my blood counts were so low that I had to spend another day in Seattle so I could have a transfusion. My right leg was also experiencing some swelling, and we made a trip to the UW Medical Center for another vascular ultrasound. This time, they found blood clots forming deep in my veins, and that's known as deep vein thrombosis. Chemotherapy messes with a patient's body, and clotting is often a side effect. The following Wednesday after my 10th infusion, we headed over to the UW Medical Center's anticoagulation clinic where I once again was placed on blood thinners. Fortunately for both of us, they prescribed oral tablets rather than syringes. On April 3rd, Amy drove us into Seattle for my final chemo infusion. I am so thankful that the SCCA provided us with documentation that allowed us to go to the front of the ferry line during our trips to and from Seattle. Sometimes the line stretched way up the hill in Edmonds, and I was often nauseous and barely functional on the way home. With the form, and as long as we had purchased our return tickets when we boarded in Kingston, Amy could drive right to the dock, show the dock hands the form, and they would move us to the front of the line and even position us next to the bathroom as they loaded the boat, if necessary. Honestly, I don't know what was worse. Everything leading up to and including amputation or chemotherapy. Near the end, I felt that I was barely alive. Even with several transfusions, my blood counts were practically non-existent. I have never felt more fatigued in my life. I could hardly stand up from my chair. I was also despondent. I had no appetite again, and everything tasted awful. Chemo left me with sores all throughout my mouth, throat, and nasal cavity, and my hair was bailing on me as well. We had a .22 caliber pistol in the nightstand next to the bed, and Amy took it to a neighbor's house just in case my depression took a turn towards suicide. Chemo was also messing with my brain. I was having a hard time remembering things or just trying to come up with a word. But the thoughts of all of the treatments being for naught forced me to confront the possibility of death like I have never done before. Sarcoma would keep spreading in my lungs, and I would die gasping for air. What would that be like? How would Amy get by on her own?